I want you to just try to put yourself in a very specific scenario for a second.
Okay.
So it's 3 a.m, right? You are an elderly widow living completely alone.
Right.
And you wake up in the dead of night to this terrifying, violent sound of your front door just splintering inward.
Now that's awful.
Yeah. A career criminal has just kicked it off its hinges. He tears through your house, ransacks your life, steals irreplaceable family heirlooms, and then he just vanishes back into the dark with absolute impunity.
Gone.
Exactly. So you're trembling, obviously. You call the authorities. And what actually happens?
Well, usually...
You're essentially told by this bored voice on the phone to, log the incident online.
Yeah, you just get a reference number.
Right. You become just another invisible data point in a system where the official detection rate for residential burglary has plummeted to a pathetic 5%.
5%. I mean, it is a statistical reality that feels almost entirely divorced from the concept of a functioning society.
It really does. Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind and just picture a completely different scene playing out, maybe 3 counties away on that exact same morning.
Okay, what's the contrast?
The sun is just coming up, and a heavily armed tactical police unit is aggressively kicking down another door.
But not for the burglar.
Nope. The target behind this door isn't a human trafficker, it isn't a violent predator, and it certainly isn't the guy from the first house.
Right.
Their target is just a regular guy, a father of 2, making his morning coffee. And his only crime.
He casually hit the like button on a politically incorrect joke on social media.
It's crazy. When you lay those 2 realities side by side, it creates this genuinely jarring contrast.
Totally.
It's the kind of juxtaposition that forces a civilization to just, look in the mirror.
It is the absolute definition of a dystopian reality check. And it really forces us, and you listening right now, to ask a really profound, unsettling question.
Which is how we got here. Exactly. How on earth did the system that was supposedly designed and funded and built to protect our physical safety mutate into a sprawling, militarized apparatus that spends its time policing our private thoughts?
That transition from physical protector to ideological enforcer is exactly what we are exploring today. And the mechanics behind it are just fascinating.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a massive, really complex, and incredibly compelling mission ahead of us today.
We really do.
We are reviewing a brand new, ultra-long, wildly incisive, and fascinating ebook titled HR in High Vis, Wasting Police Time in a Gynocentric Dystopia by Conrad Riker.
It's a huge piece of work.
It is. Now, before we take a single step further into this labyrinth, I need to ask you, yes, you listening right now, to please like and subscribe to this channel.
Definitely.
Your support is what keeps these deep dives going. And if the ideas we're about to discuss hook you, if they resonate with what you're seeing out in the world, I strongly urge you to check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this explosive book right now.
I would absolutely echo that recommendation.
You really are going to want to read the full source text.
Yeah, because what we are doing today is synthesizing a very dense, heavily researched argument. To truly grasp the architecture of Riker's thesis, you need to read his complete field manual.
But that is the perfect way to describe it, honestly, a field manual. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, about who this specific deep dive is crafted for.
Right, the target audience.
Exactly. This analysis is heavily targeted toward men's rights activists and red-pilled manosphere men who want to fundamentally understand the history and the underlying mechanics of our institutions before they were, as the author claims, systematically captured and repurposed by feminists and Marxists.
The author, Conrad Riker, is very deliberate about his audience. He is speaking directly to a demographic of men who feel this intense friction with modern institutions.
Yeah.
And he is trying to provide them with a historical and philosophical map of how those institutions were transformed.
Which naturally leads me to a mandatory, and I have to say, very firmly stated disclaimer.
Yes, let's get this out there.
We have to be absolutely crystal clear on this point right up front. This book contains highly charged, deeply controversial political content that aggressively touches on both left-wing and right-wing themes.
Very aggressive themes.
Right. And we, as your hosts, are not taking sides here. We are never taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content, nor are we condemning them.
We're just the messengers here.
Exactly. We are simply acting as impartial guides, attempting to accurately, fairly, and thoroughly convey the profound and provocative ideas contained in Riker's original source material.
Our entire job is to lay out his arguments piece by piece so you can examine the logic for yourself.
That's the mission. We're looking at the gears of the machine Riker has built.
Right, like how does he construct this worldview? What evidence does he use to support this highly provocative thesis? We are here to analyze the structure of his thought.
So let's dive into that structure. Riker's core thesis begins in a place you might not actually expect.
Oh, definitely not.
If you want to understand how our institutions, like the police, the legal system, the courts were captured, he says you don't start by looking at laws or budgets.
No, you have to start by looking at language.
Right. He argues that the entire capture of society begins with grammar itself.
It is a brilliant starting point because it is so foundational. Riker posits that modern society is currently suffering from what he terms a nominalist distortion of language.
A nominalist distortion?
Yeah, and to understand his argument, we need to clarify what nominalism actually is in this context.
Okay, yes, let's break that down for anyone who hasn't taken a deep dive into philosophy recently. Nominalism basically means what? That words are just arbitrary labels.
Exactly. In classical philosophy, you have a concept often associated with Aristotle, which is that things have an objective, inherent nature.
Okay.
If you define a term with Aristotelian precision, a word corresponds to an objective reality.
Like a physical thing.
Right. A crime, for instance, like a burglary, a theft, or a physical assault, is an objective violation of a person or their property. It exists in the physical, tangible realm.
It leaves evidence.
Yeah, it leaves behind a broken window, a missing wallet, a bruised body. It is an undeniable material fact.
But nominalism flips that entirely. It suggests that words don't have an inherent meaning tied to objective reality. They are just like fluid constructs that we can bend and change depending on how we feel.
Right. And Riker argues that the state has weaponized this nominalism to distort our fundamental understanding of human interaction.
How so?
Well, under a classical objective framework, if I tell a joke you don't like, or if we have a robust disagreement, or if I refuse to validate a personal delusion you might hold about yourself, that is not a crime.
No, it's just life.
Exactly. It is simply natural human interaction. It is the messy, everyday reality of free speech and rational thought.
But according to the book, the state has surgically redefined words to blur the line between a physical attack and a hurt feeling.
They really have.
They've taken words with massive objective weight words like abuse, hate, and violence, and stretched them to basically mean any disagreement with the prevailing dogma.
That's spot on.
It's like playing a board game where the other person is losing, so they just constantly rewrite the rules in real time, but they also have the police on speed dial to enforce their imaginary new rulebook.
That is a fantastic analogy, and it perfectly sets up one of the most critical theoretical frameworks in the book.
Okay, let's get into it.
Riker traces this linguistic distortion back to a very specific historical evolution of Marxist thought. He introduces a mechanism he calls the chthonic helix.
The chthonic helix. Okay, that sounds like a sci-fi weapon, so we definitely need to explain the mechanics of how that actually works.
To understand the chthonic helix, we have to look at why classical Marxism failed.
Right, because it didn't work out the way they planned.
Not at all. Classical Marxism, as envisioned by Karl Marx, was fundamentally an economic theory. The goal was to incite a revolution by pitting the working class, the proletariat, against the wealthy owners.
The bourgeoisie.
Exactly, right there on the factory floor. The revolutionaries assumed that once the workers realized they were being exploited, they would violently overthrow the economic system.
But that didn't happen in the West.
It completely failed in the West. As Riker points out, when the early 20th century rolled around, especially during World War I, the revolutionaries realized that the working class didn't actually want a communist utopia.
They had other priorities.
Right. The working class ultimately preferred their national pride, they preferred objective truth, and above all, they were deeply loyal to the structure of the nuclear family.
So the economic revolution just hit a brick wall.
It did.
So because the factory floor revolution failed, the revolutionaries didn't just, throw up their hands, admit defeat, and go home. They adapted.
They adapted and they mutated the strategy.
They mutated profoundly.
This is where thinkers like Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School come in. They realized that if you want to overthrow a capitalist society, you can't just attack its bank accounts.
You have to attack its culture.
Yes. You have to embark on what they called a long march through the institutions. And this mutation is what Riker calls the chthonic helix.
Okay, I see.
They took a Marxist dialectic, the oppressor versus oppressed narrative, and applied it to the entirety of human culture.
So the mechanism of the helix is this constant twisting mutation from economics over to culture. They shifted the revolutionary vanguard away from the factory floor and moved it directly into the domestic bedroom.
Precisely. The operational goal shifted. It was no longer about dismantling the factory.
It became about the total dismantling of the nuclear family.
Yes, the traditional patriarchy and what Riker calls objective logos, which represents reason, logic, and transcendent truth.
Right.
Because you can destroy a society's ability to reason objectively, you can rebuild it in whatever image you want.
And the way Riker claims they execute this in our everyday, modern lives is through an institution that most people find incredibly boring, but he views as deeply sinister.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
He hilariously, but very darkly, calls it the HR sacrament.
The HR sacrament is such a great conceptualization.
It really is.
Riker argues that in the past, society relied on the hard, masculine fist of objective justice.
Meaning the police.
Exactly. The police were there to physically catch violent criminals. But that objective system has been systematically replaced by the soft, suffocating, velvet-gloved hug of the Human Resources Department.
He literally describes HR managers, diversity and inclusion officers, and modern police leadership as the new secular priesthood of this cultural Marxist religion, right?
He does. And the reason he calls it a sacrament is because it represents a complete epistemological shift in how society determines right and wrong.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
This priesthood has elevated subjective offense, which Riker characterizes philosophically as feminine, horizontal, and chaotic over objective harm.
Which he characterizes as masculine, vertical, and rooted in rigid logic.
Exactly.
I want to make sure I'm totally grasping this. So if someone steals my car, that is objective harm. The car is gone. It is a vertical, logical. But if someone tweets a joke that makes a diversity manager sitting in an office feel uncomfortable, that is subjective offense.
That's horizontal.
Right? It just spreads as an emotion.
Yes.
And Riker is arguing that the state now actively prioritizes punishing the tweeter over catching the car thief.
That is his exact argument.
Wait, I have to jump in here with a major question because there's a logical leap here that feels terrifying.
Go for it.
If the state legally equates a bruised ego, someone feeling offended, with a bruised body, doesn't that inherently give the state a blank check to use physical paramilitary violence to stop speech?
Yes.
I mean, if my words are legally considered violence, doesn't that give the police the moral justification to use actual violence against me? Is this what Riker means when he calls this linguistic shift the Gramscian gateway drug?
You have just nailed the most dangerous mechanism in Riker's entire thesis. Yes, that is precisely what the Gramscian gateway drug is. It is a terrifying logical deduction. Riker argues that if we accept the fundamental premise that words equal violence, which is the foundational claim of this new HR ideology, then it naturally and legally follows that the state is entirely justified in using actual physical state violence to suppress those words.
Because they are just, quote-unquote, stopping violence.
Exactly. The linguistic distortion is the gateway drug that justifies deploying heavily armed police officers to interrogate a citizen over a tweet.
It's insane.
It takes what used to be a civil intellectual disagreement and legally transmutates it into a criminal offense.
Right.
This gives the state the absolute moral pretext to invade private homes, seize property, and ruin lives just to enforce ideological compliance.
It's a complete 180-degree inversion of reality, and that perfectly transitions us from the theoretical grammar of this tyranny to how Riker claims it actually manifests on the streets.
The real-world application.
Right. We are moving from the dictionary to the constabulary, which he argues has literally been transformed into a paramilitary HR department.
And this is where Riker moves from philosophy to hard, undeniable, empirical data. The statistics he presents in this section of the book are chilling.
Let's really dig into those numbers, because they're staggering to the point of being absurd.
They really are.
As we touched on at the top of the show, Riker points out that the official detection rate for residential burglary in England and Wales hovers around 5%.
5%.
5%. That means if a criminal kicks your door in and steals everything you own, there is a 95% chance they will get away with it entirely.
It's essentially decriminalized.
Pretty much. You aren't getting a detective knocking on your door to dust for prints. You're just getting an automated email with a crime reference number so you can file an insurance claim.
A 95% failure rate. If a hospital had a 95% failure rate for a routine surgery, it would be shut down immediately.
Instantly. Yet, simultaneously, Riker demonstrates that these exact same police forces are directing massive, unprecedented resources toward enforcing tone policing on the internet and performing choreographed dances at pride marches.
The disparity is wild. The book details that between 2015 and 2021, UK police forces recorded over 120,000 non-crime hate incidents.
Wow.
Let me repeat that for the listener. 120,000 incidents that, by the state's own definition, are not crimes.
Think about the mechanics of that for a second. Think about the tens of thousands of police man hours, the millions of pounds in taxpayer funds, the sheer bureaucratic infrastructure required to catalog 120,000 incidents of people simply saying things that offended someone else.
It's an entire industry.
It is, and these aren't just harmless logs. An NCHI can show up on an enhanced background check and completely ruin a person's career.
Let's look at the specific examples he uses to illustrate this, because they really bring the dystopian absurdity to life. The Harry Miller case from 2019 and 2020 is heavily featured. It is an absolute watershed moment in British legal history, and it perfectly encapsulates Riker's argument.
So Harry Miller is a businessman, and ironically, he's a former police officer himself.
Which makes it even crazier.
He gets a visit at his actual workplace from Humberside Police. His alleged offense, did he threaten someone? No. Did he incite a riot? No.
What did he do?
He hit the like button on a comedic, politically incorrect limerick about transgender identity on Twitter.
Unbelievable.
The officers showed up to interrogate him in front of his colleagues. And when Miller asked the incredibly rational question, "What law have I actually broken?" the attending officer uttered what Riker calls the chilling maxim of our era.
I know exactly what quote you're talking about.
The officer said, "I am here to check your thinking."
I am here to check your thinking. Riker dissects that quote extensively.
It's so Orwellian.
It really is. He uses it to prove that the police officer in that moment was no longer acting as an enforcer of objective law. He wasn't there to investigate a crime scene. He was acting as a progressive human resources manager performing an ideological wellness check on a citizen's brain.
And it doesn't stop at just checking, thinking, and creating creepy background files. People are actually being dragged away in handcuffs.
Yeah, the arrests are a huge part of this.
Riker cites the Malicious Communications Act 2003, specifically Section 127. He notes that in 2015 alone, over 3,000 citizens were arrested for sending grossly offensive messages.
3,000 people.
Processed through the criminal justice system for typing words that hurt someone's feelings. He also points to the famous Marcus Meechan case, the guy known online as Count Dankula.
Oh, right, the pug video.
Yeah. He was literally prosecuted in 2018 for a comedy video he made with his girlfriend's pug.
Riker analyzes this entire phenomenon through a concept he calls spatial feminization.
Spatial feminization. What does he mean by that?
He argues that the physical and institutional space of policing has been fundamentally feminized because the College of Policing has been thoroughly captured by ideology.
Okay, so the training academies.
Exactly. They have embedded frameworks like critical race theory directly into the national training manuals.
So when he says spatial feminization, what is the actual mechanism there? How does that change a police force on a daily basis?
The mechanism is a complete realignment of institutional values.
How so?
Riker argues that under this new framework, subjective concepts like safety, emotional comfort, and ideological conformity have entirely replaced objective requirements like physical risk-taking, courage, and objective competence.
Wow, so the priorities are completely flipped.
Totally flipped. He paints a very harsh picture of modern recruits, describing them as lacking the physical courage required to actually face down violent, drug-fueled criminals in the real world.
So because they are afraid of the physical world, they retreat into the digital one.
Exactly. They prefer the absolute physical safety of sitting at a desk with a cup of coffee, scouring social media for wrongthink, and tone policing the internet.
Which is much easier than chasing a burglar.
Far easier.
Yeah.
And here's the genius of Riker's critique. He says their cowardice is actively moralized.
Oh, that's interesting.
Their utter incompetence at stopping real violent crime is masked by their hyper-competence at catching digital dissidents. They get praised and promoted for fighting hate, which allows them to ignore the fact that they are failing to fight actual violence.
Man, it really is like an immune system that has completely malfunctioned.
It's an autoimmune disease.
It really is. It's ignoring the actual lethal virus spreading through the body, and instead it's violently attacking perfectly healthy cells just because they look a little different.
Right.
But I have to ask, how does Riker explain the individual psychology of the cop on the beat? I mean, these people join the police force, presumably, to be heroes. to stop bad guys. Why do they go along with this?
Riker addresses this by analyzing the institutional incentives. He talks about the double bind placed on the individual officer.
Okay, explain the double bind for the officers.
Let's say you are a traditional cop who wants to do objective police work. You are commanded by the public to police reality. But internally, you are systematically punished by your superiors if investigating reality conflicts with progressive narratives.
Give me an example of how that works in practice.
Well, Riker argues that if an officer accurately investigates crime trends within certain minority demographics, or if they apply cold, objective logic to a highly charged emotional dispute, they risk being immediately labeled a bigot by their own HR department.
So it's career suicide.
It is absolute career suicide. The system structurally rewards the officer who abandons the dangerous, physically demanding work of objective policing in favor of the safe, highly praised, and promotion-friendly work of ideological enforcement.
They just fall in line to keep their jobs.
Yeah, they learn to put on the High Vis jacket, they learn to do the Macarena at the parade, because managing the public's perception of their morality has entirely replaced managing the physical reality of crime.
Managing perception has replaced managing reality. That is a heavy, heavy insight.
It explains so much.
And it leads us right into the next terrifying frontier of Riker's book. Because if the police are abandoning public property crimes to police the digital space, what are they doing in the physical world?
They're not just staying on Twitter.
No. Riker argues they are invading the absolute final sanctuary of the individual.
The private home.
Exactly, yes. We move from the digital panopticon to the physical extraction engine. We enter what Riker calls the family court inferno.
This segment of the book is genuinely incredibly dark.
It really is. Riker claims that through the modern mechanisms of no-fault divorce, a man who has spent his entire life building a home, providing for his children, and protecting his assets can be instantly reduced to nothing more than a biological ATM for the state's forcible husbandry.
He describes the family courts not as halls of justice, but as unaccountable administrative tribunals.
Unaccountable is the key word.
Yes, and he says they operate on statutory saluted precedent.
What does that mean?
This means the objective rule of law contracts, evidence, fault, is entirely replaced by the subjective, emotional narrative of the accuser. And the financial extraction mechanisms they employ are absolutely brutal.
Brutal is the right word. He details how these courts don't just ask nicely for money. They use the explicit threat of overwhelming state violence.
Right. They will seize a man's passport so he can't travel.
They will freeze his bank account so he can't buy food.
They will garnish his wages directly from his employer, humiliating him in the process, all to extract his wealth and transfer it to female beneficiaries.
Riker argues that the state doesn't view the traditional father as a pillar of civilization anymore. It views him as a financial criminal whose past productive labor must be retroactively punished.
To explain the why behind this brutal systemic shift, Riker introduces perhaps the darkest, most complex psychological theory in the entire book.
Okay, let's get into the psychology.
He calls it the animus projective helix, and he introduces the concept of the state acting as the institutional husband.
The institutional husband.
Correct.
I need you to walk me through the mechanics of that, because that sounds like something straight out of a dystopian sci-fi novel.
It requires a bit of psychological unpacking, but it makes a lot of sense. Riker posits that much of modern feminism is a psychological architecture built on hypergamous resentment.
Okay, let's define hypergamy for the listener before we add resentment to it.
Sure. Hypergamy is the well-documented sociological and biological tendency for women to seek mates who are of equal or higher socioeconomic status.
It is the drive to marry up, basically.
Right, or across the dominance hierarchy. Riker argues that modern society, by pushing women to prioritize careers while simultaneously tearing down traditional male achievement, creates a massive deficit of men who meet this hypergamous standard.
Okay, so the math doesn't work out.
Exactly. This leads to deep, unconscious resentment.
And how does this connect to the animus projective helix?
Well, the animus is a Jungian term for the unconscious masculine side of a woman.
Right, Carl Jung.
Yes. Riker argues that, driven by this hypergamous resentment, a modern woman will often project her own internal chaos, her own dissatisfaction, onto the nearest patriarchal structure.
Which is usually her husband.
Exactly. But the crucial, terrifying twist in Riker's theory is that the state eagerly steps in to absorb this projection.
I see where this is going. So if a married couple has a minor domestic disagreement in their kitchen, say, a tense argument over a budget, or a raised voice, or even just a rolled eye.
According to Riker's framework, when she picks up the phone and calls the police in that scenario, she isn't calling a public service to report a crime.
What's she doing?
She is summoning her heavily armed boyfriend.
Whoa!
Yeah, she is activating the violent, limitless apparatus of the state to enforce her emotional dictates upon a man who has, in her eyes, failed her internal hypergamous test.
That is a brutal assessment.
Riker writes that the heavily armed police officer who arrives at the front door is no longer a peacekeeper. He is functioning as a simping HR manager with a Glock.
A simping HR manager with a Glock. Wow.
His job is to extract the man from his own property, separate him from his children, and initiate the financial stripping process, all to appease the emotional instability of the female accuser.
The state has literally become the ultimate beta book provider, acting as the institutional husband.
Precisely.
And to illustrate just how warped and morally bankrupt this priority system is, Riker draws a horrifying contrast in the book. He brings up the grooming gang scandals in Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford.
This is where his argument reaches its absolute, most searing, undeniable critique.
Yeah, it's hard to read. Riker points out that the authorities in those cities, the police, the social services, the local councils, systematically, knowingly ignored the organized, horrific abuse of over 1,400 working-class girls over the course of decades.
Decades. Let that sink in.
Why? Why would they let that happen? He claims they ignored it because they prioritized ideological compliance?
Yes, they were utterly paralyzed by the fear of being accused of racism if they targeted the specific demographic that was committing the crimes.
They chose the safety of the progressive narrative over the physical safety of 1,400 children.
Exact.
Yet, Riker points out, these exact same police forces will rapidly, aggressively, and violently deploy massive resources to pursue working-class native males for minor domestic friction or online wrongthink.
It's the ultimate proof of his epic theater concept.
They let 1,400 girls suffer unimaginable horrors to protect their ideological purity, but they will literally kick your front door off its hinges if your tone of voice distressed your wife.
It is the ultimate, undeniable manifestation of the state elevating progressive ideology and feminist grievance over the objective physical protection of the vulnerable. When you look at Rotherham next to Harry Miller, Riker's thesis becomes very difficult to dismiss.
It really does, but wait, I have to throw a massive wrench into the gears here.
Okay, let's hear it.
To Riker's credit, he actually includes the feminist steelman argument in the book, and we need to address it fairly.
Yes, we should.
The counter-argument goes like this. Didn't the state have to intervene in the private sphere of the home? Historically, men held all the legal and economic power. If you look back before things like the 1870 Married Women's Property Act, women were incredibly vulnerable to male tyranny in the home.
They were.
They couldn't own property. They had no legal standing. The state had to make the private sphere public in order to protect them from abuse. How does Riker respond to that historical reality?
It's an excellent, necessary question, and Riker tackles it head-on with a very nuanced historical analysis. He dismantles this steelman by conceding the historical premise, but entirely destroying the modern conclusion.
How so? Walk me through his logic.
Riker freely acknowledges that, yes, historical laws like coverture existed, and yes, there was severe legal inequality.
Yeah.
The husband was the legal head of the household.
Right.
However, he argues that those old laws were a strict package deal. Yes, a husband had absolute legal authority, but that authority was inextricably legally bound to lifelong, inescapable financial and social responsibility for his wife.
He had to take care of her.
He had to maintain her, he was legally liable for her debts, and he was mandated to provide for her.
Supreme authority was paired with supreme responsibility. You couldn't have one without the other.
Exactly. Riker's argument is that today, the state has fundamentally severed that connection.
Meaning they kept the responsibility but took away the authority.
Yes. The modern state demands the exact same, if not vastly greater, financial extraction and responsibility from the man, through mechanisms like endless alimony, exorbitant child support, and catastrophic asset division. But it does so without granting him a single ounce of the historical authority, respect, or legal standing in his own home.
It's like a subscription service you can never cancel. The price goes up every year. You don't actually get the product. And if you stop paying, men with guns show up to put you in a cage.
That is a very grim, very accurate way to summarize his point. The modern state, Riker writes, extracts the resources of a traditional marriage while actively subsidizing its destruction.
It acts less like a protector of women and more like a high vis pimp, monetizing the dissolution of the family.
A high vis pimp. The imagery he uses is just relentless.
And it gets even more invasive as we move forward, because if the state has successfully monetized the breakdown of the physical home, it makes grim sense that their next target for regulation would be the mind itself.
Yes, the internal life of a man.
Riker argues that the state isn't satisfied with just taking a man's wallet, his children, and his house. It demands total, absolute ownership of his private thoughts and his most private sexuality.
This is where we enter what Riker refers to as the Velvet Gulag and the pornography panopticon.
The Velvet Gulag. That phrase is fascinating. It implies a prison, but one that is comfortable, almost unnoticeable until it's too late.
It's not made of barbed wire.
No, it's made of HR policies.
The concept draws directly on the philosopher Herbert Marcuse, specifically his highly influential 1965 essay on repressive tolerance.
Okay, let's unpack Marcuse a bit.
Riker argues we are currently living in a soft totalitarianism designed by Marcuse's disciples. It doesn't look like a Siberian labor camp where you freeze to death. It looks like a mandatory diversity and inclusion seminar where you are politely smiled at while your career is threatened.
How does Marcuse's idea of tolerance actually work in practice? Like, how does that manifest?
True tolerance, according to Marcuse's neo-Marxist theory, is not about free speech. It requires the systematic institutional suppression of rational right-wing or traditional speech, while simultaneously elevating and aggressively protecting progressive emotional fragility.
So it's very one-sided.
Completely. The Velvet Gulag is a warm suffocation. You are free to do whatever you want as long as you only want what the HR department approves of.
And to bring this out of the philosophical clouds and show how this soft totalitarianism destroys real lives, Riker introduces a hypothetical, or rather a composite case study that he calls Thomas the Carpenter.
It is a very grounding, terrifyingly mundane example.
So Thomas is just a regular guy. He works with his hands, he pays his taxes, he has never committed an act of physical violence in his life.
He is a normal citizen.
But he's divorced, he's been alienated from his kids thanks to the machinery of the family courts we just discussed, and he is living alone. One morning, his front door is splintered by police in High Vis jackets.
Just like the intro.
Exactly. They swarm his house, they seize his hard drives, his laptop, his phone. And his crime? Did he hurt someone? No. He simply possesses adult video files featuring consensual staged BDSM fantasies.
There is no victim.
None. There is no real-world violence. The actors were paid. But Thomas is dragged to the station, interrogated, and classified for the rest of his life as a sex offender.
It destroys him completely.
And Riker points out this isn't just a scary bedtime story. He cites data showing that an estimated 10,000 individuals are arrested annually in England and Wales for victimless pornography offenses. 10,000 men.
Riker uses the tragic case of Thomas to unpack the psychological trap of soft totalitarianism, which he meticulously maps out as the double bind.
The double bind. Let's dig into that.
It is a three-tiered mechanism of psychological control, and it is exactly how the Velvet Gulag maintains its grip on the male mind.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of this double bind. How do they trap you?
The first tier, the primary imperative, let's call it L1, is the universal command from the state, the media, and society that you must be unconditionally inclusive, tolerant, and kind. You must accept all prevailing progressive dogmas regarding gender, sexuality, and behavior.
Okay, L1. Be a good, empathetic citizen. Don't be a jerk.
Right. It seems harmless. But then comes L2, the secondary injunction.
Which is?
This rule completely redefines reality. It states that any rational disagreement with those dogmas, any reliance on objective biological reality or traditional morality, is inherently an act of psychological violence.
I see.
If you disagree with L1, you aren't just wrong, you are actively committing harm.
So you're commanded to be kind, but simply stating a biological fact is legally defined as an act of violence against a protected group. You literally cannot win.
Exactly. And that leads to the final trap. L3, the meta lock.
The meta lock, what does that do?
The meta lock ensures that if you attempt to point out the glaring, insane contradiction between L1 and L2, if you complain that you're being trapped by an absurd definition of violence, your very complaint is treated as absolute, undeniable proof of your hateful disposition and your guilt.
Oh man, it's a closed loop of pure insanity. If you defend yourself, your defense is proof of your crime.
It is civilizational gaslighting on a massive scale. And when applied to the pornography panopticon, Riker argues the state is utilizing this exact double bind to corner men entirely.
How does that connect to the pornography arrests?
Think about the historical context. Historically, men utilized private biological outlets, fantasies, specific media to manage their inherent drives, without harming society.
Like a release valve.
Yes, but the state, having effectively monopolized the sexual market through the economic extraction of the family courts, now criminalizes the private, victimless fantasies men use as a release valve.
They close every exit.
They do. They project the state's own institutional hysteria onto the rational male, operating under the bizarre assumption that a private, consensual fantasy on a hard drive is mathematically equivalent to a public threat.
Which really makes me wonder, if the state is acting as this macroeconomic HR department, spending millions to police thoughts and private consensual media, is this really about safety?
Right, that's the big question.
Or is it, as Riker suggests throughout the book, a massive form of epic theater? Is it just a bureaucratic minstrel show designed to mask their own sheer incompetence at stopping actual violent criminals who are stabbing people in the streets right now?
Riker firmly, unequivocally concludes it is the latter. It is epic theater.
They're just putting on a show.
Completely.
Yeah.
The state manufactures easy, victimless crimes like seizing a lonely carpenter's laptop at dawn to generate shiny statistics.
It looks good on paper.
It allows the police to boast about high arrest rates and moral purpose, all while the actual physical society, the streets and the neighborhoods, burn around them. It is extraction and control masquerading as governance.
We have painted a deeply, deeply grim picture today.
We have.
If a listener is tracking with everything we've said, if they see this Jenny-centric dystopia functioning around them, they might feel completely black-pilled right now. It feels hopeless.
But it's not.
Right. Riker doesn't end the book there. As we said at the beginning, this isn't just a 200-page catalog of grievances. It is explicitly designed as a field manual. So what exactly is the rational man supposed to do when he finds himself in the Velvet Gulag?
This brings us to the culmination of Riker's work, which is arguably the most important part of the book. He introduces the concept of epistemological self-defense and advocates for the ultimate strategy of going gulp.
Epistemological self-defense. Basically, defending your very ability to know what is true and what is false.
Precisely. Before you can defend your property, you have to defend your mind.
Makes sense.
Riker demands that men ruthlessly, unapologetically align themselves with the classical transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. He argues that you must intentionally poison your own mind against the feminine consensus of the herd.
It has to be an active process.
The epistemological shift within yourself has to be violent and absolute. You must look at the double bind, recognize it as a trap, and simply refuse to participate in the collective gaslighting.
And he doesn't just offer high-level philosophy here. He provides a very specific, actionable, tactical playbook for how to execute this in everyday life.
The rules are very clear.
The first rule in his playbook: never, ever apologize to the mob or the HR tribunals.
This is crucial. A modern apology, Riker says, is not about seeking forgiveness. It is a secular confession to a bloodthirsty tribunal.
They just want you to bend the knee.
Yes. When they come for you over a joke or a stated fact, they don't want your sympathy. They want your dignity and your submission. If you apologize, you validate their fake moral authority. You give them nothing.
Second rule in the tactical playbook: do not use the left's prefix-laden terminology. He explicitly says you must never validate delusional pronouns, and you must flat out refuse to use their invented academic vocabulary, like the word cisgender.
Because language is the battlefield.
Right, tying back to nominalism.
Exactly. By adopting their grammar, as we discussed with nominalism at the very beginning, you concede the premise of their reality. If you use their words, you are playing their game on their board. You must hold the line on objective Aristotelian definitions.
Third tactical move, and this one is fascinating: form the anti-HR defense network and weaponize the bureaucracy against the bureaucrats themselves.
I love this part.
He specifically advocates using subject access requests, or SARs.
This is a brilliant piece of legal judo. Riker notes that the state relies on secrecy and isolation to intimidate individuals.
Like with the hate incidents.
Yes. For example, they will record a non-crime hate incident against you without your knowledge, hoping you just cower in fear when you find out. Riker says you must use the state's own data protection laws to audit them.
You turn it around on them.
You file a SAR. You legally force them to disclose under penalty of perjury every single secret file and email they hold on you for having a sense of humor.
You shine a massive spotlight on the roaches.
Exactly. You expose their malfeasance to the light, and more importantly, you share those legal templates with other men. You turn their cheap intimidation tactics into a massive, expensive bureaucratic nightmare for them. You clog their gears with their own paperwork.
It's about fighting back with paper, logic, and sheer refusal. But the final strategy, the ultimate endgame Riker advocates for the rational man, is going Galt.
Right.
Now, for anyone who hasn't read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, going Galt refers to the character John Galt, who convinces the most productive, brilliant members of a decaying society to simply go on strike.
They just stop working.
They stop producing, they disappear, and they let the parasite society collapse under its own weight. How does Riker apply this massive concept to the modern British legal context?
What's fascinating here is that Riker explicitly and forcefully rejects the idea of political revolution. He doesn't want men marching in the streets.
Why not? Doesn't anger usually lead to revelation?
Because, as Riker argues, revolution creates chaos, and chaos only ever serves the Marxists. Chaos gives the state the perfect, terrifying pretext to expand state power even further, to declare emergencies, and to lock down the very men rebelling.
So no violent uprisings, no protests.
No. Riker advocates for a bloodless, silent, utterly devastating revolution of secession and reconstruction.
What does that look like practically?
He defines going Galt in this context as the deliberate legal reduction of a man's taxable footprint and the total absolute withdrawal from any romantic and cohabitational entanglement with a state-hostile legal system.
He's saying, look at the rigged casino, realize the house always wins, and just walk away from the table entirely.
Yes. Do not marry under a regime that actively monetizes and incentivizes your destruction.
Yes, a huge step.
Do not cohabitate in a way that exposes your hard-earned assets to the subjective whims of the family courts. And the data shows this is already happening. Yet, Riker points to the Office for National Statistics data showing that marriage rates in England and Wales have fallen to their absolute lowest levels since records began in 1862.
Since 1862?
Wow. The political establishment wrings its hands, writing endless articles wondering why modern men won't commit. Riker says it's not a mystery at all.
They're just opting out.
Because men have realized that signing a modern marriage contract is like walking voluntarily into a tiger cage, handing the key to a weeping HR representative and begging her not to call the zookeepers.
That is a wild analogy, but it illustrates his point with terrifying clarity. But let me push back on the strategy of going Gulp for a second.
Sure.
Riker uses the analogy of a tick on a dog. He says if you find a tick, you don't debate the pick. You don't try to reason with a parasite or ask it to be fair, you just cut off its blood supply.
Right.
But how exactly does a man actually starve the dialectic in his everyday normal life? We all still have to eat, we have to work, we have to live in this society, you can't just vanish into the mountains.
Starving the dialectic means deliberately withdrawing your surplus. Riker acknowledges you have to survive, you have to eat. But he argues you must consciously stop feeding the beast with your excess labor, your emotional investment, and your institutional participation.
So it's about minimizing the energy you give to the system.
Exactly. If you are a highly competent, driven man, do not strive for that corporate promotion that simply pushes you into a higher tax bracket, where your extra wealth is instantly redistributed by the state to fund the very HR departments and diversity inspectorates that openly despise you.
You just quietly step off the corporate ladder.
Produce exactly what you need to thrive personally. Protect what you have aggressively. Build parallel offline communities of rational men. But utterly refuse to generate the economic surplus that the gynocentric state requires to survive.
You starve the parasite by refusing to be a willing, productive host.
Exactly.
Which leads us to a final, incredibly deep and provocative thought for you, the listener, to ponder today, directly building on Riker's core text.
This is the big takeaway.
Think about this. If the entire bureaucratic apparatus of this soft totalitarianism, the bloated HR departments, the sprawling diversity inspectorates, the deeply punitive and extractive family courts, if all of it is funded entirely by the taxation and the surplus labor of the very men it allegedly alienates, pathologizes, and criminalizes, what happens to the mathematical sustainability of this entire civilization when a critical mass of those men simply realize the game is rigged, decide to say no, and stop producing?
Is the brutal arithmetic of unsustainability. As Riker points out, you simply cannot fund a complex civilization on the backs of men who have been relentlessly told by every institution that they are the inherent problem with the world.
The math just doesn't work.
At some point, the backs break, or the men simply walk off the job. And the one thing the state cannot print, no matter how much currency it creates, is male competence.
It is a chilling, inevitable mathematical reality to consider. I want you to think back to that image we opened with at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The door being kicked in.
Yeah. The man sitting in his own kitchen, the home he bought with his own sweat and labor, making his morning coffee, suddenly interrupted by the violent thud of police boots kicking in his door. They aren't there to protect him from the burglar who ransacked the widow's house.
No.
They are there to drag him before an ideological tribunal because his wife felt uncomfortable, or because he liked a joke on the internet, or because he possessed a private fantasy on a hard drive. Riker's ultimate message is that unless rational men wake up, recognize the grammar of this tyranny, and act with cold, calculated epistemological resolve, that man in the kitchen will eventually be every man.
The choice, as the book starkly frowns it, is whether to submit quietly to the velvet suffocation of the age or state, or to step completely outside the cathedral of madness, withdraw your surplus, and rebuild from the foundation up alongside other rational men.
And that wraps up our incredibly extensive, deep journey into this source material. If this breakdown hooked you, if you feel that cold, clear sense of recognition that Riker talks about when he describes the state of the world, and you want to arm your mind with these specific arguments and dialectical weapons, you absolutely must buy this book.
I cannot stress enough that it is a dense, challenging, and profoundly provocative read that requires your full attention.
Do not wait. Check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy HR and High Vis, Wasting Police Time in a Genocentric Dystopia by Conrad Riker. Arm yourself with the actual source material. Also, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack. You need to continue following his ongoing analysis and his work as this situation develops.
And remember that this deep dive is just our synthesis of his core points. The full, devastating weight of the evidence lies within those pages.
Finally, please, once more, like and subscribe to this channel to support the show. We rely entirely on you to keep these deep dives going and to keep bringing you this level of analysis. Thank you, yes you, for giving us your time and joining us on this intense exploration. Take care of yourselves, and above all else, keep thinking critically.